This is normally the part of the MotoGP season where Aprilia's challenge falls apart a little bit through the hot flyaway races, but the 2025 bike should have won in Indonesia, and it very comfortably won at Phillip Island, dominating both the sprint with Marco Bezzecchi and the main race with Raul Fernandez. So Val, based on this run of recent form at a time when it's normally struggling, is the Aprilia now the best bike on the MotoGP grid?
It is massive credit to Aprilia that I can't just laugh off that question and say definitely not. They've done an amazing job, and I think the evidence that it might very well be the best bike in MotoGP is, it's growing quite a bit. I'm still not particularly ready to commit because of the run races we had, and also because best bike is very often a very difficult question. I remember it would have been in 2019 when we first were sort of entering the Ducati era, even while Marc was still dominating on the Honda. But of course, Marc's injury was around the corner. And I remember at one point during one of my first races in MotoGP media asking Andrea Dovizioso in a scrum the question the journalists love. So is the Ducati now the best bike? To which Doffy like, you silly. It's never that simple. It's always like, you have to look at it as the combination of the specific rider, not just because of the rider level, but how the rider traits combine with the bike traits, etc. But that was sort of a different, more satellite factory world. And we've since then, Ducati made it really easy by just finishing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 every other weekend. So clearly it was the best bike. In fact, at Phillip Island last year, it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. In the sprint and in the main race, there was a tire pressure penalty in the sprint, but otherwise, just almost perfect, basically. And this year, it got really showed up at Phillip Island, obviously in Marc Marquez's absence, by Aprilia, which counterintuitively, because of what we know about the bike, we'd say it's this quarter speedy thing traditionally. But it's kind of not been good historically at Phillip Island until this weekend, where it's been incredible.
Unbeatable.
So that gives credence to the theory, the fact that Aprilia has looked unbeatable at some tracks and really very potent at other tracks where it's not supposed to be great. I think that at least that starts the conversation, but we also have to say, okay, so Bezzecchi should have won at Mandalika, probably should have won at Phillip Island. Raul Fernandez did win at Phillip Island. 2 weird tracks. Phillip Island's not only this windy, very unusual layout, but it's also apparently gotten a lot bumpier, and it feels like the Ducatis weren't handling that particularly well. Mandalika, of course, the harder rear tire carcass that stymied Marc Marquez in particular. We still saw that the bike was okay in Fermin Aldeguer's hands. At Phillip Island, it was quite potent in Fabio Di Giannantonio's hands. So it's hard to say. It's a cop-out. I really do want to see Sepang for it. But it's amazing that it's a legit question. That's incredible. And I think if you wanted like a gut call from me, no, but it's so close. That would be my gut call.
The thing that makes this a really complicated question to answer is this Marc Marquez factor, because you feel like you can't judge any bike Marc is really on and work out what is the bike and what is the element he's bringing. Ducati is even harder to judge in this situation, with Pecco Bagnaia being at the opposite end of the scale right now. So I feel like that's making the Ducati versus the Aprilia battle that this kind of all rests on really hard to judge right now in terms of what is the bike, what is the riders, what is the broken rider. For me, it's a really unclear picture until we get Marquez back on a Ducati or another rider on a Ducati producing kind of predictable form.
Yeah, it's the situation where sort of at some tracks we just like bake in half a second of the Marquez effect, right? Like for instance, I think he would have won at Phillip Island had he showed up at Phillip Island, had he been fit at Phillip Island. But does that mean the Ducati would have been the best bike at Phillip Island? Probably not.
No,
I don't think that's how that works. But it's also a question of, does the bike that is maybe the best MotoGP bike in Marc Marquez's hands, is it the best bike for the average rider who is still superhuman, but by Marc Marquez's standards is a mere mortal? Well, I think it is interesting that the Ducati variance in performance has been seemingly larger this season than in the last season, when they had more bikes and when they had like a lot more different bikes, when they had the GP23 that was badly outmatched by the GP24. This year, whatever's actually truly going on with the GP25, I believe the difference is just not large enough to explain the variance that we're seeing in weekend from rider to rider. And, at the very least, some of it is they're no longer going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 because the other manufacturers have done a good job, because Aprilia is interfering, but also, the Hondas are getting in there. Even the KTMs with its stalled development, sometimes the Yamaha's at least qualifying well enough to sort of run amongst them. But it's strange because it also does feel like there's just more more performance variants. There shouldn't be, because the bikes are all very similar, and one of them, like one of the specs, literally hasn't changed from last year
No.
when it was all conquering. A lot of credit again has to go to Aprilia. I also do think that that old Dovi point is clearly true. You cannot divorce this from the rider, and for me, Marco Bezzecchi is such a huge part of it. I wasn't, I liked the signing a lot when it happened, but I wasn't sure there was like a clear upgrade on Aleix Espargaro and Maverick Vinales, two riders who I think at their peak are phenomenal. But what Bezzecchi has been so good at that neither Aleix nor Maverick particularly impressed me at, and maybe it will also depend on the bike, but still, you don't expect a big drop off session to session. You don't expect a particularly big drop off weekend to weekend. Even when the track isn't so favorable to the Aprilia, Bezzecchi rocks up and he's up there. He's up there all the time. He's been up there. Aprilia has retained its strength out of the box this season. Aprilia has somehow managed to avoid its late season slide that used to be the trademark, absolutely super recognizable characteristic of the RSGP. A lot of that, again, it's credit to the technical structure and what they've done. But I think Marco is, even though he is younger than those two guys, and even though I respect and like those two guys so much, but maybe more of a sort of dependable adult in the room when it comes to performance, not when it comes to errors on track, because he did injure Marc Marquez.
Yeah.
He does mess up qualifying sometimes, but in terms of showing up to a session and you're like, we're going to get pretty close to the best of Marco here, is more of a bet you can make than you could with the previous Aprilia riders.
Yeah, absolutely. Bez was a tough signing to judge because he was in the middle of his wobbly 2024 and he just did not get on with how last year's new rear tyre worked with the old spec Ducati, and we just didn't see anything much from him all season. But when the bike is at least halfway there, he's going to be consistently really fast and sometimes really, really special, and not have these sort of ripples in performance that you did get from the previous Aprilia Works riders. And obviously no Jorge Martin at the moment, so Bez has absolute full focus at Aprilia, and it feels like it's one of those things where it's the right rider on the right bike at the right time, and from basically sort of Silverstone onwards, they've just flown together. So with Ducati in this slightly confusing state, and okay, Honda, Yamaha, KTM making progress at different levels, but Aprilia is the one that's going into next season with this new talisman rider looking really good on its bike, loads of momentum. Could we even say Aprilia is a favourite for next year's title?
No, we cannot. No, we cannot. And I've learned my lesson the hard way. I learned it in 2017 when Maverick Vinales had like one of the best off seasons of anybody ever as the new Yamaha signing. And I was like, yep, this is going to be his year. Marquez looks at least vaguely vulnerable when the Honda isn't quite up there, and I was obviously proven wrong in the end. I think betting against Marc is just not something I particularly want to do, and I struggle to get my head around the scenario that would need to happen. How badly wrong the 2026, like they would have to stand still again, I think, in the off season for Marc not to be the favorite. They would have to have, even some of the, like Honda used to have really bad off seasons, and you show up and by round 3, round 4, it's like, oh, he's winning again repeatedly.
Well, sometimes they'd have a really bad off season and he'd break a leg or something, and they'd still have that exact.
It's usually shoulders. It's usually shoulder stuff almost all the time. There's various shoulder surgeries. They're in a good position. They can dream, and that's good. They've been very good at dreaming. They've been very good at believing themselves when maybe people like me didn't. And I was wrong, so I'm ready and willing to be proven wrong again. But this is not a normal scenario where you're just like you're gaining momentum for next season. This is a guy in Marc Marquez who historically you need to be there every weekend in every band of conditions. He will not spot you weekends. He will spot you points. He'll crash out, but he'll never be slow enough for you to be like, all right, this is the time to take 20 points out of him. He'll never give you that opportunity. So you have to be on the ball all the time, and that will be something new for the organization, I think, because in this run-in, unfortunately, they're also creating a bit of a weight of expectation on their shoulders, which will be interesting to manage.
It will, but at least in everything they've done over the last few weeks, they've now created some hope that 2026 might not be as straightforward a Marquez Ducati walkover as we've all been expecting.